Hi, my name is Holly Sinclair, and I just turned 34 years old. A year and a half ago, I sat at my dining room table while my father forcefully slid a freshly printed contract toward me. His words were ice cold. Sign the paper. You're going to sell this house to Madison for $250,000. If you refuse, as of this exact moment, you are dead to this family. Let me paint the picture for you. He was demanding I hand over a historic property appraised at $750,000 for a mere fraction of its worth. This was the home my late grandmother had legally willed to me, her only grandchild who actually paused her life to hold her hand through her final 5 years on Earth. My parents sat there, fully expecting me to burst into tears. They anticipated my immediate surrender. But there was a massive piece of the puzzle they were completely blind to. Long before they organized this little extortion meeting, I had already been on the phone with the chief executive officer of the very real estate firm my sister worked for. Before we dive deep into how this all unfolded, if you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself and outsmarting toxic family dynamics, please take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, I absolutely love hearing from you guys, so drop a comment down below letting me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. To truly understand this mess, we have to rewind to the days before my grandmother passed. Being raised in the Sinclair family meant existing entirely in the shadow cast by my younger sister, Madison. My parents never even attempted to mask their blatant favoritism. Whether it was a random Tuesday dinner, a festive Thanksgiving gathering, or a casual neighborhood block party, the relentless comparisons were suffocating. Madison was the undeniable golden child. She was fierce, competitive, and supposedly on a one-way track to immense wealth. I, on the other hand, was the background character. Our Madison is going to take over the world, my mother would gush, her smile beaming with absolute adoration. And Holly, well, Holly has a very sweet heart. She always delivered that line like being kind was some sort of tragic consolation prize for a lack of ambition. When I announced my decision to become an elementary school teacher, my dad's sheer disappointment sucked the oxygen right out of the room. From that day forward, he flat out stopped inquiring about my life. I never got asked how my students were doing. I never got asked if I was enjoying my career. He just offered me a blank wall of silence. But the day Madison secured a highly coveted role at Mercer and Associates, a top-tier real estate development agency, my parents basically threw a parade. They bragged to every single person within earshot. Their youngest daughter was a corporate prodigy. Their youngest daughter was destined for luxury. Every family event played out like a broken record. A massive crowd of aunts and uncles would flock to Madison, practically begging to hear about her luxury company car, her exclusive client dinners, and her corner office with a view. Meanwhile, I lingered on the absolute fringes of the room, completely invisible. So, Madison, give us the details on that massive commercial zone downtown. Uncle Robert would boom across the patio. Nobody ever leaned over to ask me about the reading programs I was developing. Nobody cared about the little minds I was dedicating my life to shaping. In the Sinclair family rulebook, teaching kids wasn't a valid metric of success. The marginalization was so slow and insidious that it took me years to realize I had essentially become a piece of living room furniture to my own flesh and blood. Always present, highly functional, but entirely uncelebrated. I swallowed the disrespect back then, but I made a silent vow that I wouldn't swallow it forever. My grandmother Eleanor was the sole exception to the family rule. She looked past the mundane teacher label and truly perceived the woman I was. Every single Sunday afternoon, like clockwork, I would drive over to her breathtaking Victorian estate on Maple Street. We'd sit out on her wraparound porch, sipping freshly brewed sweet tea while she recounted vibrant tales of her fiercely independent youth. "You and I are cut from the exact same cloth, Holly," she murmured to me one afternoon, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You possess a very quiet kind of strength. People are always going to underestimate that to their own detriment." Everything shattered when her doctors sat us down and delivered a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis. They handed her a grim timeline, 18 months, maybe 24 if her body fought hard. Predictably, Madison's calendar was suddenly far too packed for hospital visits. There was always a newly acquired client, an emergency seminar in Chicago, or a crucial networking gala. Her climbing the corporate ladder took absolute precedence over a dying matriarch. My parents managed to make exactly one visit. They hovered awkwardly at the foot of her bed for about 45 minutes before fleeing. "It's just entirely too depressing to watch her fade," my mother justified over a brief phone call. It was abundantly clear that preserving their own emotional comfort was far more vital than alleviating my grandmother's devastating isolation. So, I did what had to be done. I immediately requested a long-term leave of absence from my school district. I packed my bags and relocated straight into the spare bedroom of that sprawling Victorian home. For 5 grueling, beautiful, heartbreaking years, I was her sole lifeline. I organized her complex medication schedules, prepared the few meals her stomach could tolerate, and sat awake holding her fragile hand through the agonizing midnight hours when the morphine wasn't enough. In half a decade, my mother dialed my number exactly one time. It wasn't to check on my mental health, and it certainly wasn't to offer a weekend of respite care. "You are throwing your life away, Holly," she scolded sharply through the receiver. "You do realize she has absolutely no liquid assets to leave you, right?" I didn't even dignify that with a response. I just gently set the phone back on the receiver. Grandma Eleanor took her final breath on a brilliantly sunny Tuesday morning in April. The dawn light was washing across her quilt in stunning ribbons of gold. I was holding her hand. Her face was incredibly peaceful, and she actually managed a faint smile. "I made sure everything is secured for you," she rasped, her voice as thin as paper. "Do not let a single person strip it away from you." I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about until her lawyer cracked open the final paperwork. We gathered for the official reading 3 weeks after the burial. Mr. Patterson's downtown legal office screamed of generational wealth, rich mahogany desks, towering bookshelves, and the heavy scent of old paper and serious money. My parents claimed the chairs on the far side of the sprawling conference table, with Madison flanking them. I quietly claimed a seat near the exit. Mr. Patterson retrieved his reading glasses, cleared his throat, and broke the heavy silence. "I, Eleanor Marie Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath my entire estate, specifically the property located at 847 Maple Street, solely to my granddaughter, Holly Elizabeth Sinclair." She was the only one who remained when the rest of the world walked away. The vacuum of silence that sucked the air out of that room was utterly deafening. All the color drained instantly from my father's face. My mother's jaw practically unhinged. But Madison's visceral reaction is burned into my memory forever. Her flawlessly manicured hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. The muscles in her jaw ticked violently as she tried to cage her fury. "There has to be a clerical error," Madison snapped, her tone dripping with venom. Grandma was heavily medicated. She clearly lacked the cognitive capacity to execute this document. Mr. Patterson slowly removed his spectacles, taking his time to polish the lenses. "I can absolutely guarantee you, Miss Sinclair, that your grandmother was operating at full mental capacity. This binding document was notarized, witnessed by third parties, and executed flawlessly under the strictest legal parameters. $750,000. That was the conservative market appraisal for the historic Maple Street property. And Grandma had bypassed them all, leaving every single antique floorboard and crystal chandelier to me." As the tense meeting wrapped up, Mr. Patterson discreetly passed a thick, sealed envelope into my hands. "Eleanor specifically instructed me to pass this along," he murmured. "She mentioned you should only break the seal when the waters get rough." I slipped it into my tote bag without giving it a second glance. As I walked out of those double-glass doors, I could physically feel the heat of Madison's glare digging into my spine. When I dared to glance back over my shoulder, the look she gave me wasn't just sibling rivalry. She was looking at me like I was an obstacle that needed to be eradicated. The psychological warfare commenced a mere 3 days after we laid Grandma to rest. My parents ambushed me at the Victorian house, my house, without even a courtesy text. They let themselves into the sitting room, planting themselves on the vintage sofa with heavily rehearsed expressions of parental disappointment. "We need to have a serious conversation regarding the deed," my father initiated, leaning forward. What exactly is there to discuss? It's fundamentally unjust, Holly. One sibling hoarding an asset of this magnitude, he gestured broadly at the soaring ceilings and the priceless antique decor Grandma had curated over her lifetime. Families pool their resources, my mother chimed in, nodding aggressively. Madison needs an anchor. She's heavily focused on her 5-year plan, getting married, starting a family. A sprawling estate like this is exactly what she requires. And what exactly happens to my future? I challenged. They shot each other a look. It was that incredibly patronizing side-eye parents give a toddler who asks a foolish question. Sweetie, my mother sighed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. You teach elementary school. You don't require an estate of this caliber. Madison is constructing an empire. Her ambitions require a certain lifestyle. And boom, there it was. The exact same toxic narrative that had defined my entire existence, just wrapped in a slightly different package. For 14 straight days, they bombarded me. Sometimes they arrived as a united front, sometimes they attacked in solo shifts. My father utilized aggressive intimidation. My mother weaponized her tears. It was a relentless cycle of good cop, bad cop, and the script was so painfully unoriginal I could have recited their lines for them. If you refuse to split this asset with your sister, my father finally growled, you can consider yourself an orphan. I spent that entire night pacing the hardwood floors, crunching the numbers in my head. If I capitulated and sold the property to Madison at their absurdly low demand, I would instantly hemorrhage $500,000 in equity. I would lose the roof over my head. I would lose the very last physical connection I had to Grandma Eleanor. But if I dug my heels in, I would officially lose my entire immediate family. It felt like an impossible crossroad. But as the sun began to peek through the lace curtains, a profound realization washed over me. I could survive losing them, but I absolutely could not survive losing my own self-respect. They framed it as a family discussion. In reality, it was a firing squad. My parents marched through the front door right at 7 p.m., claiming the wingback chairs like Supreme Court justices. Madison made a point of strolling in 20 minutes late, strutting through the foyer wearing a custom-tailored blazer that undoubtedly cost more than my entire semester's salary. She offered zero apologies for keeping us waiting. Women like Madison believe their time is the only time that holds value. Let's expedite this, she announced, refusing to even take a seat. I have a reservation at a Michelin-starred place at 9. My dad reached into his briefcase and produced a legally binding sales contract, entirely pre-written. Here is the blueprint, Holly. You put your signature on this line. You transfer the deed to Madison for $250,000. And we permanently sweep this ugly chapter under the rug. I stared down at the insulting figure. Then I leveled my gaze at my dad. The most recent appraisal places the market value at $750,000. Madison let out a sharp, grating laugh. Market value? Holly, please. Do you even comprehend what that phrase entails? She crossed her arms, exuding total superiority. Have you ever closed a real estate transaction in your life? I operate at the highest levels of this industry. Take it from a professional, $250,000 is incredibly charitable. It's barely 30% of its actual worth. It's the family discount, my mother interjected smoothly. This is how blood relatives operate. They circled me like a pack of wolves cornering a lone deer. Every logical counterargument I presented was immediately shot down. Every time I tried to reinforce my boundaries, they turned the screws a little tighter. This isn't a solo choice. It's a family directive, my father barked. Except the deed has my name on it. Madison invaded my personal space, her designer heels echoing sharply on the vintage wood. It is Grandma's house. You just got incredibly lucky that you were the one pouring her water when her heart stopped. I completely put my life on hold for 5 years, Madison. I was wiping her brow while you were padding your bank account. Well, some of us carry actual corporate responsibilities, she shot back. She vaguely alluded to a massive upcoming project that made acquiring the house a necessity, though she didn't offer specifics, and frankly, I didn't care to ask. Once Madison and my dad finally stormed out, my mother lingered in the foyer. She waited precisely until their taillights vanished down the street before pivoting back to me, her eyes miraculously welling up with tears on command. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. I'd watched her deploy this exact crying technique to get out of speeding tickets and to force customer service refunds my entire life. "Holly, my sweet girl, can we just have a heart-to-heart?" I pointed to the velvet sofa. She sank into it, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a perfectly timed tissue. "You are single-handedly detonating this family," she whimpered. "Do you even grasp the gravity of that? Every ounce of sweat your father and I poured into this family, every sacrifice, you're incinerating it all over a pile of bricks. It is significantly more than bricks, Mom. This is Grandma's legacy. It's my permanent residence. It is just lumber and plaster." Her voice hitched with theatrical perfection. "Blood is what matters. Blood is eternal. This architecture will eventually rot, but family bonds are meant to be unbreakable." She extended her trembling hand. Like an idiot, I let her grasp mine. "Don't you recall the countless nights I sat by your bed when you had the flu? Don't you remember the endless hours we worked to provide for you? And this horrific greed is how you show your gratitude." The manufactured guilt surged up my throat, thick and suffocating. She was a sniper, and she knew exactly where all my emotional weak points were hidden. "Mom, I love you. I care about this family deeply. But I absolutely refuse to surrender the one thing Grandma trusted me to defend." Instantly, her entire demeanor shifted. The faux tears evaporated in a millisecond. Her face turned to stone. "I am officially giving you 7 days, Holly." She rose from the couch, aggressively smoothing out her slacks. 7 days to drop this ridiculous rebellion. If you don't sign that paper, do not ever refer to me as your mother again." She marched out the door without a single backward glance. The deadbolt clicking into place sounded exactly like a judge banging a gavel. I sat entirely alone in the dim light of the parlor, completely engulfed by Grandma's cherished belongings, deeply terrified that defending my inheritance was going to cost me every living relative I had left. My cell phone vibrated violently against my nightstand at exactly midnight. I was wide awake, staring blankly into the dark when Madison's caller ID illuminated the room. I heavily debated sending it to voicemail, but my gut screamed that I needed to document whatever she was about to say. "Did I interrupt your sleep cycle?" Her voice was entirely devoid of the fake warmth she utilized around our parents. It was strictly corporate, strictly ruthless. "What's the point of this call, Madison? I just needed to make sure we're perfectly clear on the reality of your situation." A brief silence, followed by the distinct clink of ice cubes hitting a glass. "This defiant little charade you're putting on is mildly entertaining, but you seem to have forgotten exactly who you are going up against." "I'm perfectly aware. I'm dealing with my sister." She let out a chilling, breathy laugh. "I am significantly more than your sibling, Holly. I am a top-tier project director at the most ruthless real estate conglomerate in this state. My web of connections would make your head spin. I have elite attorneys, zoning commissioners, and massive contractors who owe me massive favors on speed dial. Are you officially threatening me?" "I'm simply providing data." Another agonizing pause. "You're still employed by the public school district, correct? It would be incredibly tragic if anonymous concerns started filtering into the superintendent's office regarding a specific educator's mental stability. Municipal budgets are incredibly tight right now. The board is practically begging for a justifiable reason to terminate staff." My veins turned to ice. "You wouldn't dare. I wouldn't even have to lift a finger directly. I command people who command people. That is how the corporate food chain operates, Holly. I guess they skipped that lesson in your cozy little arts and crafts classroom." The line went dead. I sat frozen in the pitch black for what felt like hours, my phone gripped so tightly my knuckles ached. Right next to my lamp, Grandma's silver-framed portrait seemed to offer a reassuring gaze. That's when the switch flipped. I booted up my laptop and typed a very specific query into the search engine, Mercer and Associates Executive Leadership Board. I had no clue what my endgame was yet, but I was absolutely finished playing the role of the helpless victim. Grandma's final breath echoed in my skull. "Do not let a single person strip it away." The heavy, sealed envelope from the lawyer's office had been collecting dust in my purse for over a month. That night, I ripped it open. Tucked inside was a perfectly preserved sheet of her signature lavender paper, accompanied by a sleek business card. My darling Holly, if you are breaking this seal, it guarantees that someone is actively trying to steal the security I built for you. I anticipated this greed. Your parents have always been blind to the worth of things that don't have a price tag. If you find yourself needing to retain the property while legally fortifying your boundaries, dial the number enclosed. Linda Torres was my trusted counsel long before Patterson came into the picture. She is a mastermind at unconventional real estate loopholes. She will forge a path for you. Just keep in mind, securing an asset doesn't always require a white-knuckle grip. Sometimes, the most brilliant way to hold on to something is to loosen your fingers. Endless love, Grandma Eleanor. Linda Torres. The name rattled around in my brain. I called the number the absolute second the sun came up. Holly Sinclair, Linda's voice boomed through the speaker, radiating confidence and warmth. Eleanor always swore you'd eventually pop up on my caller ID. It is an absolute pleasure. I am in desperate need of a lifeline, I admitted. My immediate family is utilizing blackmail to force me into selling my grandmother's estate to my sister for pennies on the dollar. Spill every single detail. And I did. I held nothing back. I detailed the guilt trips, the fake tears, the absurd $250,000 contract, and the midnight threat to obliterate my teaching career. When my frantic monologue ended, Linda went dead silent for a few seconds. Have you ever familiarized yourself with the concept of a commercial sale-leaseback transaction? She finally asked. Never. The mechanics are beautifully straightforward. We legally transfer ownership of the estate for its absolute maximum market value. But tethered to the sale is an ironclad, multi-decade lease agreement. The corporation secures a prime investment vehicle, you secure a massive payout, and you retain the absolute legal right to reside in the home undisturbed. My pulse began to race. But what kind of investor wants to purchase a property where the seller refuses to vacate? Linda's resulting chuckle shifted the entire trajectory of my life. Humor me for a second, Linda asked. What is the exact address of Eleanor's estate? 847 Maple Street. Smack in the middle of the historic Victorian district. I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a low, impressed whistle. Holly, are you currently in a stable chair? Why? Because I sat in a highly confidential boardroom meeting roughly 6 days ago. Mercer and Associates, one of the most aggressive real estate titans on the seaboard, is desperately hunting for a flagship property in that exact zip code. My stomach completely plummeted. Mercer and Associates. Linda, that is my sister's employer. Oh, I am fully aware. Linda's tone was suddenly swimming with a deliciously wicked sense of amusement. Their top executive, Jonathan Mercer, is dead set on opening an elite satellite headquarters on your side of the city. He wants a high-end, residential to commercial conversion. Your grandmother's sprawling first floor is the holy grail of what he's looking for. The sheer magnitude of the irony hit me like a freight train. Madison was leveraging her status at a company whose top boss was desperately seeking the exact asset I held the deed to. What kind of man is Jonathan Mercer? I asked cautiously. He is a machine. He operates strictly on logic and profit margins. He utterly despises office politics and personal drama. If the numbers align, he pulls the trigger. If they don't, he walks. Emotions are completely irrelevant to his checkbook. My mind spun back to Madison's midnight phone call. Her arrogance. Her ironclad belief that she could destroy my livelihood with a snap of her fingers. If Mercer actually purchases the deed to Maple Street, I said, the realization dawning slowly, Madison would technically be required to report there. At least twice a week, Linda finished for me. Based on the preliminary blueprints, Mercer intends for this specific satellite branch to manage all top-tier regional accounts. His senior project directors are mandated to rotate through that specific location. The cosmic justice of the situation was almost entirely unbelievable. Madison, who threw temper tantrums demanding my house, would be legally obligated to clock into work under my roof, entirely at the mercy of her CEO's directives. I promise you, I'm not doing this out of spite, I whispered, almost trying to convince myself. Of course not, Linda replied, her grin practically audible through the cellular connection. This is simply brilliant commerce. It's a wildly lucrative contract for all parties involved, well, with one notable exception. Let's get Mercer on the calendar. Before the meeting could happen, my parents decided to launch their nuclear strike. They orchestrated a massive family dinner, which was nothing more than a carefully designed arena for my public execution. On a crisp Saturday night, the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, crammed into my parents' dining room. The table was ironically set with Grandma Eleanor's vintage floral china. Halfway through the roasted chicken, my father abruptly pushed his chair back and stood up. He grabbed his salad fork and forcefully dinged it against his crystal wine glass, commanding the room like a dictator silencing his peasants. "I need to address an incredibly sensitive family matter," he projected, ensuring the kitchen staff could probably hear him. "A matter that threatens the very fabric of this family." The chatter instantly died. Utensils were carefully placed down. 18 pairs of eyes locked onto him. As the majority of you are aware, my late mother transferred her real estate to Holly. He let the silence stretch to maximize the drama. What you are likely unaware of is that Holly has aggressively refused to distribute the equity with Madison. She has explicitly prioritized a piece of real estate over the well-being of her own flesh and blood. A collective gasp of disapproval echoed down the long table. Heavy, judgmental stares pinned me to my seat. Right on cue, my mother initiated the waterworks. Huge, theatrical, shoulder-shaking sobs designed to extract maximum sympathy from the audience. She has mutated into someone else entirely since Eleanor's passing, my mom wailed into her napkin. "I don't even recognize the girl I gave birth to." Aunt Carol leaned across the table, aggressively patting my mother's forearm. "That is just abhorrent, Patricia. Truly abhorrent." Uncle Robert scowled at me from across the centerpiece. "Holly, you seriously need to reevaluate your priorities. Madison requires that infrastructure to build her portfolio. She has massive life plans. Plans to walk down the aisle," my mother sobbed louder. "To breed. To live a full life." And the insult was complete. In front of my entire bloodline, they publicly declared that my 5 years of grueling caregiving, my dedication to public education, and my entire existence were fundamentally worthless compared to Madison's hypothetical future. "Holly," my father's voice cracked like a whip. "Every single adult in this room knows exactly what the moral choice is." I sat utterly isolated, drowning under the weight of 18 judgmental glares, all anticipating my emotional collapse. But instead of terror, a profound, icy clarity washed over my brain. Madison decided it was her turn for a monologue. She slowly rose from her seat, aggressively smoothing out her $1,000 silk dress, and paced around the room until she was looming directly behind my chair. Her shadow literally draped over my shoulders. "Allow me to clarify the situation for everyone present," she projected, radiating the toxic confidence of a woman who had never suffered a consequence in her life. "My older sister is a public school employee. Her daily responsibilities involve teaching toddlers how to stay within the lines of a coloring book and reciting nursery rhymes." A smattering of condescending chuckles rippled through the older relatives. "She is entirely uneducated in asset management. She has zero comprehension of market investments, wealth accumulation, or strategic financial planning." Madison rested a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder, exactly how a CEO might pat a janitor. "Holly essentially won the lottery by simply existing in the right bedroom when Grandma's organs failed. That is the entirety of her contribution. I abandoned my career to nurse her for 5 uninterrupted years," I stated, my voice remarkably level. "Literally anyone could have executed those tasks. You swapped out some soiled sheets and microwaved some broth." Madison rolled her eyes. "Let's not pretend you were performing neurosurgery." Aunt Carol nodded as if Madison had just recited scripture. Uncle Robert mumbled his absolute agreement. I scanned the faces of these people who shared my DNA. People whose diapers I had helped change, people whose weddings I had attended. They were genuinely treating me like a criminal. And in that singular, defining moment, the blinders finally ripped off. This circus wasn't about the physical house. It had absolutely zero to do with real estate. Madison didn't desire Grandma's Victorian because she needed shelter. She demanded it purely because I possessed it. For the absolute first time in our 34 years of existence, I held something of immense value that she could not easily conquer, and her ego could not process the rejection. You genuinely believe you've secured a victory here, don't you? Madison hissed, leaning down so only my ears caught the venom. You are completely out of your depth. I write the rules to this game, Holly, and I do not lose. I didn't utter a single syllable in response. Instead, the final remnants of my childhood fear evaporated into the ether. My spine turned to titanium. I casually pushed my chair back and stood up to my full height. No hysterical sobbing. No frantic justifications. Just the sheer power of rising to my feet while 18 bullies watched in stunned, breathless silence. I locked eyes with my father, then my mother, then Madison. I slowly rotated my head, making agonizingly long eye contact with every single traitorous relative sitting at that table. I want to express my deepest gratitude, I announced, my voice slicing through the dining room like a scalpel. Thank you all for providing absolute clarity on exactly where my worth lies in this bloodline. Sit back in that chair, Holly, my father ordered, his face flushing violently red. No. That two-letter word hung in the air like a live grenade. Nobody in the history of the Sinclair family had ever heard me deploy it. I turned on my heel and strode purposefully toward the front exit. Behind me, the room erupted into absolute chaos. Chairs screeched violently against the floorboards. Men shouted in indignation. My mother shrieked my name with her trademark, hyper-rehearsed desperation. I never broke my stride. The moment I breached the front door, the crisp night air hit my lungs like pure oxygen. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan and sat completely motionless for a solid 60 seconds. My fingertips were visibly vibrating against the leather steering wheel, but it wasn't a trauma response. It was pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I reached for my phone and hit speed dial. Linda? It's Holly. Give me the post-game analysis on the dinner. It was exactly the bloodbath you predicted. I twisted the ignition, the engine roaring to life. Get Jonathan Mercer on the horn. Let him know I am fully prepared to draw up the paperwork. Are you absolutely certain about crossing this bridge? I have never possessed more certainty in my entire existence. I will have his office on the line at dawn. Hey guys, quick pause right here. If you have ever been entirely dismissed, undervalued, or publicly shamed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, drop the word boundary in the comments right now. I really need to see that I'm not the only one who has survived this kind of toxicity. And if you're dying to know exactly what happens when Madison's ruthless boss steps onto my porch, keep listening. The revenge is incredibly sweet. 14 days later, Jonathan Mercer was sitting comfortably on Grandma's vintage floral sofa. He was completely opposite to my mental image of a ruthless corporate shark. He was incredibly tall, sporting immaculate silver hair, and carrying a quiet authority that didn't require him to raise his voice. His bespoke charcoal suit was likely worth a down payment on a car, but his handshake was surprisingly grounding. Miss Sinclair, Mercer murmured, his sharp eyes scanning the intricate crown molding with genuine appreciation. This estate is a masterpiece. Flawless Victorian structural integrity, pristine original woodwork, and the zoning location is unmatched. I completely comprehend why Eleanor cherished it. She poured 43 years of her life into these walls, and I spent the final 5 ensuring she didn't have to leave them. Mercer pivoted to meet my gaze directly. That level of unwavering loyalty is exceptionally rare in the modern era. You have my utmost respect. We spent the next hour walking the perimeter. He admired the massive formal dining space, ran his hands over the floor-to-ceiling library built-ins, and took notes in the sunroom that overlooked Grandma's prized rose garden. He battered me with highly intelligent inquiries regarding the plumbing updates, foundation stability, and electrical grid. Once the inspection concluded, we returned to the parlor. Your council presented a very unique framework, he stated, crossing his legs. A full market value acquisition, permanently tethered to a 15-year residential leaseback. It is highly unorthodox for my portfolio, but it fits the exact parameters of my expansion strategy. The expansive first floor is a turnkey transition for a corporate satellite hub, and you maintain the upper levels as a private, legally protected sanctuary. He paused, steepling his fingers. And the valuation holds firm at $750,000. It's aggressively fair. But I must ask, what is the underlying motivation here? You hold the deed completely free and clear. You have the ultimate power to simply reject any sale. I had a dozen fabricated excuses loaded in the chamber. I could have blamed property taxes or maintenance costs. But looking at Mercer, I realized absolute transparency was the strongest currency. Because a specific faction of individuals is currently utilizing intense psychological warfare to strip this asset from me for pennies, I stated boldly, I must legally encase this property in a corporate structure that they cannot manipulate, while simultaneously preserving my right to sleep in my own bed. Mercer slowly nodded, processing the data. Your candor is highly valued, Miss Sinclair. However, there is a variable we need to put on the table. I locked eyes with him. You're referring to the fact that Madison Sinclair is my biological sister. A brief flash of genuine surprise flickered across his stoic features. Then, completely breaking character, the silver-haired shark actually chuckled. I had a sneaking suspicion you possessed the full picture. You were already aware? Mercer leaned back, entirely unbothered. Madison occasionally utilizes her family connections as networking leverage. She frequently name-drops a sibling who operates in the public school sector. When Linda Torres pitched a prime Victorian owned by an educator named Sinclair, the arithmetic wasn't difficult to complete. And you were still willing to execute the contract? Miss Sinclair, my financial portfolio is completely insulated from the domestic squabbles of my payroll. I operate solely on the metric of tangible value. He gestured expansively around the parlor. This architecture holds immense value. Your leaseback proposal holds value. Whatever vendetta exists between you and your sister is completely irrelevant to me, provided it does not bleed into my profit margins. The massive knot of anxiety that had been living in my chest for weeks instantly dissolved. I had fully expected the deal to evaporate the second he uncovered the conflict of interest. Instead, Mercer smoothly unclasped his leather folio and withdrew a massive stack of legal documents. My legal team finalized the drafting at midnight. It's a bulletproof commercial sale-leaseback. A guaranteed 15-year residential term with an option to renew. Your monthly rent is locked at a significantly reduced rate as compensation for the shared space. You possess absolute, exclusive access to the upper stories. We begin retrofitting the ground floor into an elite satellite office on Monday. I scrutinized every single printed letter. Linda had already given it the green light, promising me there were no trapdoors, but I needed to witness the numbers with my own two eyes. The acquisition payout, $750,000. The lease lock, 15 years. The monthly rent, shockingly affordable. My fingers actually vibrated as I uncapped the heavy fountain pen. Not from terror, but from the overwhelming tidal wave of relief. I carved my signature onto the final dotted line. Jonathan Mercer mirrored my action, solidifying the ink. The hard notary slammed her official stamp onto the parchment. A brilliant strategic maneuver, Miss Sinclair, Mercer congratulated, offering a firm handshake. The $750,000 would hit my routing number within 3 business days. I was financially liberated, and I would still brew my morning coffee in Grandma's kitchen. Oh, just a minor administrative note, Mercer added casually as he packed his briefcase. The satellite hub officially launches in 4 weeks. Madison is being reassigned to this specific branch. I couldn't help the massive grin that broke across my face. The heavy cardstock invitations hit Madison's corporate desk a month later. Linda kept me thoroughly updated via her inside contacts. The firm was throwing a massive, mandatory attendance launch gala to celebrate the ribbon cutting of Mercer and Associates' newest strategic location. Every single senior-level executive was legally required to attend. The address printed on the gold foil invitation was 847 Maple Street. My exact coordinates. When the evening of the gala arrived, I casually stood by my second-story bay window, watching the chaos unfold. Premium catering vans hijacked the driveway. Massive, Elegant white canopies were erected directly over Grandma's beloved rose beds. Golden string lights were intricately woven through the branches of the ancient oaks. The home I had fought so desperately to protect was temporarily masquerading as a corporate playground. The luxury sedans started rolling in at dusk. High-powered executives dripping in tailored suits, junior staff clutching expensive champagne flutes, wealthy board members marveling at the historic masonry. And then, the main event arrived. Madison's silver Mercedes G-Class aggressively hopped the curb. She stepped out onto the pavement, violently aggressively adjusting the lapels of her power suit, her eyes glued to her iPhone screen as she furiously typed out an email. She hadn't even bothered to look up at the architecture. When she finally tucked her phone away and lifted her gaze to the facade, time literally froze. The sequence of emotions that violently rippled across her face is something I will treasure until my dying day. Initial sheer confusion, rapidly morphing into utter disbelief, culminating in raw, unadulterated horror. She stood absolutely paralyzed on the concrete walkway while her coworkers seamlessly flowed past her, cheerfully patting her on the back and praising the venue choice. I calmly unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped out onto the wraparound porch. We locked eyes over the manicured lawn. "Good evening, Madison," I projected, my voice ringing out crystal clear over the smooth jazz playing in the background. "Welcome to your brand new regional headquarters." Her feet were cemented to the earth. A young, eager associate bumped into her shoulder. "Miss Sinclair, is everything all right? You look pale." Madison's jaw unhinged, bobbing up and down without producing sound. This building belongs to." She violently swallowed. "This is my sister's property." "Your sister?" The junior employee looked wildly between us, entirely baffled. "Wait, I was under the impression Mr. Mercer directly acquired this estate from a woman named Holly Sinclair." "He absolutely did," I chimed in, smoothly descending the porch stairs. "I'm Holly, and I still legally reside upstairs. Make yourselves comfortable." The official ribbon cutting commenced right at 7 p.m. Jonathan Mercer commanded the microphone stand that was currently occupying the exact spot where Grandma's television used to sit. The parlor was standing room only, packed to the gills with the city's corporate elite. Madison was hovering in the far back corner, her knuckles completely white as she maintained a death grip on her champagne flute. "I extend my deepest gratitude to all of you for celebrating this massive milestone," Mercer's voice boomed through the speakers. "This specific satellite hub physically represents our aggressive push into elite residential markets, all while preserving historic integrity." He paused, his shark-like eyes sweeping the crowd. However, I must take a moment to shine a massive spotlight on the brilliant woman who facilitated this expansion. He extended his arm, pointing directly at me. "Miss Holly Sinclair, who executed the sale of this breathtaking property, and who we are incredibly honored to retain as a long-term resident via a highly creative leaseback infrastructure." A massive wave of applause shook the room. I offered a gracious nod to the crowd, highly aware that Madison's laser-focused glare was practically burning a hole through my skull. Miss Sinclair exhibited a level of ruthless professionalism and strategic business acumen that rivals my top executives, Mercer continued, twisting the knife without even realizing it. Her grandmother fiercely protected this estate for decades, and I am profoundly thrilled that we forged a contract that secures that legacy while simultaneously padding our corporate footprint. The applause morphed into cheers. Half a dozen high-powered directors instantly swarmed me, aggressively shaking my hand, showering me with praise over the financial ingenuity of the deal. Through the entire circus, Madison remained completely petrified. But the absolute fatal blow landed when Mercer approached the microphone for his closing remarks. He happily announced that all senior project directors would be mandated to operate out of this specific building, with Madison Sinclair officially appointed as the head of the regional accounts division housed within these exact walls. An audible gasp actually escaped someone near the catering table. Madison's colleagues all slowly pivoted their heads to stare at her. The expressions ranged from highly amused to deeply investigative. "Wait, isn't she forced to work inside her sibling's house now?" a manager loudly whispered to his colleague. Madison didn't formulate a response. The deafening silence was all the confirmation they needed. My parents essentially broke the sound barrier rushing to my house. The catering crew hadn't even packed the last of the folding chairs when their sedan violently skidded into the driveway, the headlights spotlighting me like a criminal. My father practically ripped his car door off the hinges. "What in the hell did you just orchestrate?" he roared, his vocal cords straining with pure fury. "You sold family blood to a faceless corporation." "I executed a highly profitable transaction at maximum market value," I countered, leaning casually against the porch railing. "And I secured an ironclad lease that guarantees I never have to pack a single box." "That is entirely irrelevant." He closed the distance, his face vibrating with rage. "This property was meant to remain inside the Sinclair bloodline. It was remaining in the bloodline, Dad. I was living in it. You know exactly what Grandma intended." My mother suddenly materialized from the passenger side, her mascara already running in thick black rivers down her cheeks. "How could you be so utterly heartless? You completely humiliated your sister in front of her CEO." "I didn't humiliate a single soul. I executed a defensive business strategy." "A business strategy?" My dad let out a vicious, mocking laugh. "You hand out juice boxes to 8-year-olds. What the hell do you know about corporate strategy?" Those exact words would have shattered my psyche a month ago. Tonight, they literally bounced off my armor. "I apparently know enough to secure $750,000 for a piece of land you attempted to bully me into surrendering for pocket change." I maintained unbroken eye contact, refusing to blink. "I know exactly how to legally insulate what my grandmother gifted me." "And Madison? Did you even spare a single brain cell for how this destroys her office hierarchy?" Madison explicitly threatened my livelihood first. The words hung in the cool air, heavy and undeniable. She boldly promised to leverage her political contacts to have me terminated from my teaching position if I didn't submit. I simply ensured my survival. That piece of intel completely paralyzed them. My parents shot each other a panicked, frantic look. "I genuinely love this family," I said softly, the truth ringing clearly. "But love does not equate to allowing people to rob you blind." My dad aggressively opened his mouth to fire back. But for the very first time in my 34 years of existence, he slowly closed it without making a sound. The corporate grapevine operates at light speed. Within 48 hours, every single employee at Mercer and Associates was completely fluent in the Sinclair family lore. The ultra-ambitious golden child who ruthlessly attempted to extort her sister's inheritance, only to be completely outmaneuvered when the sister sold the asset directly to their mutual boss. The poetic justice of Madison being legally forced to commute to the very property she tried to steal was the ultimate water cooler gossip. She had absolutely no grounds to file an HR grievance. What was the complaint? That her sister was too smart? She couldn't beg Mercer for a transfer because he had publicly crowned me a genius. And skipping her shifts was impossible, as she was the appointed head of that specific branch. Every single Tuesday and Thursday, right at 8:45 a.m., Madison's Mercedes would reluctantly creep into my driveway. I went out of my way to be highly visible. I'd be aggressively pruning the hydrangeas as she speedwalked past, or dramatically sipping a massive mug of coffee on the veranda while she completely avoided eye contact and scurried into the commercial entrance. We didn't exchange a single syllable. Her coworkers caught on to every micro-interaction. The hushed giggles that abruptly silenced the second she walked into the break room. The sideways smirks. The massive shift in office politics. She was completely dethroned. She was no longer the untouchable rising star. She was the punchline to the greatest joke in company history. "So you just hang out in your sister's living room all day?" a brave junior associate once asked her within my earshot. Madison's response was venomous. "It is leased corporate infrastructure. But she's upstairs watching Netflix right now." That is wildly uncomfortable. Madison just aggressively tapped her keyboard, entirely defeated. The most agonizing punishment for her wasn't the relentless office mockery. It was the complete, undeniable loss of supremacy. She had dedicated her entire adult life to hoarding power, manipulating outcomes, and ensuring she never heard the word no. And now, twice a week, she was forced to physically sit inside a monument dedicated to her ultimate defeat. My parents initiated a total communication blackout. For 90 consecutive days, my phone didn't ring. No toxic ultimatums, no surprise interrogations, no weaponized tears. The sheer silence was incredibly jarring at first. When you spend 3 decades being emotionally battered, the sudden absence of the bat feels terrifyingly empty. But I firmly held my ground and refused to initiate contact. They required massive isolation to digest my new boundaries, and I desperately needed oxygen to heal from their betrayal. Then, on a chilly Sunday morning in late October, my screen illuminated. Holly. My mother's tone was completely unrecognizable. It lacked the theatricality. It sounded incredibly tiny, hesitant. "Hello, Mom." A massive, agonizing pause stretched across the cellular waves. I could literally hear her lungs expanding, wrestling with a concept she had never deployed before: accountability. I just wanted to reach out and see if you were breathing. Another lengthy pause. "Are you surviving okay?" It fell miles short of a legitimate apology. Frankly, I wasn't holding my breath for one. But it was a microscopic fracture in the massive emotional fortress she had built. "I'm doing incredibly well, Mom. I'm safe. The architecture looks stunning, by the way. I briefly drove past it on Tuesday." She nervously cleared her throat. "The rose bushes look exactly the way Eleanor kept them." I put a lot of sweat into maintaining her vision. More heavy silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she admitted, "Eleanor would have been fiercely proud of the woman you've become, Holly. The way you built a wall and defended yourself, she would have absolutely rejoiced in that." A hot tear rogue crawled down my cheek. Not rooted in trauma, but in something incredibly complex and healing. "I appreciate that, Mom. Maybe next week we could split a sandwich at the diner? Just the two of us. I think I'd really enjoy that." When the line disconnected, I sank deep into Grandma's wooden rocking chair, simply observing the auburn leaves violently swirling outside the window glass. Nothing was magically repaired. The trauma wasn't instantly vaporized, but the tectonic plates had fundamentally shifted. The Sinclair family dynamic wasn't dead, it was just officially operating under a brand new constitution. My constitution. Madison finally cracked 6 months into the new reality. I was sitting at the butcher block island, grading a massive stack of spelling tests, when 3 aggressive knocks hit my private residential door. When I turned the deadbolt, there she stood, cloaked in her standard corporate armor. Her face was locked in a neutral mask, but her eyes screamed absolute exhaustion. "Am I permitted to step inside?" I silently pulled the door wide. She stepped onto the worn kitchen floorboards, the exact same floorboards where we used to maliciously fight over the final scoop of vanilla ice cream, the room that housed the entirety of our shared childhood history. "I came here because I believe we need to engage in a dialogue," she stated, mimicking a boardroom negotiation. "As blood." "I'm listening." Madison rigidly lowered herself into a bar stool, folding her hands tightly. "I genuinely never calculated that you possess the capacity to execute a maneuver of this magnitude. For 3 decades, I operated under the assumption that..." Her voice trailed off. "That I would perpetually roll over and expose my neck?" "Yes." She stared blankly at the granite counter. "I absolutely did. So, what is the ultimate agenda of this visit, Madison?" She uncomfortably adjusted her posture. "I want to explore the possibility of rehabilitating our sisterhood. What transpired with the deed, the corporate humiliation. I am proposing we permanently bury the hatchet." "Can we actually bury it?" "I am willing to put in the labor." She took a shallow breath. "On a completely separate note, I was heavily considering, since you and Jonathan Mercer clearly have an exceptional rapport, perhaps you could formally request that he amend the regional branch rotation. Mandating my presence in this specific zip code twice a week is highly detrimental to my mental focus." And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't a desperate plea for familial reconciliation. It was a calculated business negotiation wrapped in a hug. "Madison," I replied, my voice steady as a rock. "The concept of sisterhood holds absolutely zero weight in commercial real estate contracts. But the concept of respect? That is non-negotiable." She stared back, completely frozen, waiting for the concession that was never going to arrive. I am entirely open to the idea of slowly rebuilding trust, I finalized. But I absolutely refuse to engage if your underlying motive is extracting a favor. That parasitic dynamic is the exact poison that forced us into this nightmare. She slowly stood up and walked out without issuing a rebuttal. But as she descended the porch stairs, the aggressive tension in her shoulders was entirely gone. For the very first time, she truly comprehended that the old Holly was dead and buried. Before I wrap this up, I really want to flip the script and ask you guys a massive question. If you were physically standing in my shoes at that kitchen island, how would you have handled Madison? Drop a massive A in the comments if you would have immediately forgiven her and tried to wipe the slate clean. Drop a B if you would maintain an ironclad, distant boundary exactly like I did. And please, if you want to support more stories about reclaiming your power, absolutely smash that subscribe button. We are on the final stretch now. An entire year has evaporated since the ink dried. I am still fiercely dedicated to my elementary schoolers. I still sip my coffee and grade essays at Grandma's vintage kitchen table. I still open my eyes every single morning wrapped in the exact same walls where I was unconditionally loved when my own parents couldn't be bothered. But the atmosphere is entirely revolutionized. The lower levels vibrate with corporate intensity from 9 to 5. Landlines trilling, keyboards aggressively clicking, massive $250,000 deals being struck in the exact same parlor where Grandma used to host her Sunday knitting circle. But the second the clock strikes 5 p.m., the suits vanish and the absolute tranquility returns. My absolute peace. I retained every single artifact that actually held value. Her wooden rocking chair remains stubbornly bolted to the bay window. Her ancient, flour-dusted recipe book is permanently propped against the backsplash. The dried lavender sachets she handcrafted still perfume my wardrobe. In the dead silence of the midnight hours, I swear on my life I can still feel her energy. Not in a spooky, paranormal sense. Just an echoing vibration of absolute, unconditional love that deeply soaked into the plaster over 4 decades and refuses to evaporate. $750,000 currently rests safely in a high-yield portfolio. It represents a level of financial armor I never dared to dream of. A profound freedom I didn't even realize I was starving for. Yet, the liquid cash is not the actual trophy. The true victory is unlocking my own front door without a single ounce of terror. The victory is the absolute certainty that no human being on this earth possesses the leverage to violently evict me from my own kingdom. The victory is the final, profound realization that my intrinsic human worth was never mathematically tied to my father's validation or my sister's corporate milestones. Grandma was incredibly aware of that fact. She held that truth her entire life. You possess a very quiet kind of strength, Holly. I finally comprehend the gravity of that statement. Quiet strength doesn't require screaming at the top of your lungs or violently shattering plates. It is the profound, unshakable knowledge of your own inherent value, combined with the absolute refusal to ever let a single person purchase it at a discount. She didn't just bequeath me a piece of historic real estate. She handed me the exact blueprints required to become my own savior. People frequently pull me aside and ask if I harbor deep regrets. They ask if I wish I had just surrendered the keys to keep the peace, and if the agonizing emotional toll of defending my boundaries was actually worth the bloodshed. Here is my absolute truth. I never intentionally severed the family tree. I never torched the bridges or fired back with toxic ultimatums. All I did was unilaterally rewrite the terms and conditions of my own existence. And for the very first time in 34 years, those exact terms explicitly benefit my survival. My mother and I split a sandwich at the diner every 3rd week. She has never verbally uttered the words, "I am sorry," regarding the house. But she actively memorizes my students' names. She leans in and genuinely absorbs my words when I speak. My father maintains a massive physical distance. His ego took a catastrophic sniper round, and it may never fully recover. But he offers a stiff nod when our paths cross, and during a brief interaction last Christmas, he mumbled that Eleanor would have been highly impressed by my lawn maintenance. Madison and I operate under a heavily armed, silent truce. We are not best friends, and the reality is, we likely never will be. But occasionally, when she is marching past my front porch to clock into her shift, she offers a tiny wave. And I casually wave back. Is that the textbook definition of forgiveness? I have absolutely no clue. Maybe it's an infinitely more complex emotion that simply refuses to be stuffed into a neat little box. What I do know with absolute, unshakable certainty is this: the ultimate counterattack to toxic bullying isn't explosive rage. It isn't petty, calculated vengeance. It isn't even screaming in their face. It is a terrifyingly calm decision, made with absolute mental clarity, executed with lethal precision, and fiercely guarded with zero apologies. My grandmother Eleanor deeply understood the assignment. She armed me with the capital, the legal connections, and the raw audacity to violently defend her legacy. And when the dust finally settled, the most impenetrable fortress I could ever construct wasn't made of brick and mortar. It was a legally binding contract. If you extract a single grain of wisdom from my nightmare, please let it be this: you possess the absolute, undeniable right to violently defend what belongs to you. And sometimes, the absolute quietest signatures echo infinitely louder than the most deafening screams. Thank you so incredibly much for sticking with me through this absolute roller coaster. If you saw fragments of your own life embedded in this story, whether you identify with my struggle or maybe even recognize some of Madison's toxic traits in your own past, please remember that the clock never runs out on establishing boundaries. Flood the comment section with your raw thoughts. What exact steps would you have taken? And if you are craving more intense, real-life stories about survival and karma, absolutely click on the videos linked down in the description box. I will see you guys in the next one.